Right. We've already seen how Addison is talking about within the spectators of changing the public sphere, representing the public sphere, as well as changing the public sphere in that sense of the term, modifying and reforming the public sphere. And as part of this attempt, we will read two essays today as to how he does that. And I'm taking the essay number 110. So basically, the thrust of today's essays, the two essays to be discussed today, will be the issue of superstition, as it were, superstition, witchcraft, and unreasonability. And we'll see how Addison is moving towards creating a kind of rationality and a practical rationality within the populace through his essays. So, how does Addison tackle this issue of superstition and witchcraft? And how does the Spectator paper try and moderate and transform the public sphere? Is what is going to be the subject of our essay, two essays today. Right. So I hope this is visible. Is it?
Yes, Dada.
Right. So Addison begins by saying, or the Spectator begins by saying, at a little distance from Sir Roger's house, among the ruins of an old abbey, there is a long walk of aged elms, which are shot up so very high. So it's a kind of a colonnade through which you walk, a kind of a path which is shadowed by trees, that when one passes under them, the rooks and crows that rest upon the tops of them seem to be cawing in another region. I'm very much delighted with this sort of noise, writes the Spectator, which I consider as a kind of a natural prayer to God, as it were. I like this retirement the better because of an ill report it lies under of being haunted. So you see that, and Addison points out that in many villages, he's talking here, remember, about rustic life rather than urban life. So ill report it lies of being haunted. So every village has this kind of a bhuter badi or a haunted house. For which reason, no living creature ever walks in it besides the chaplain. My good friend the butler desired me, with a grave face, not to venture myself in it after sunset, for that one of the footmen had been frightened out of his wits by a spirit that appeared to him in the shape of a black horse without a head. To which he added that about a month ago, one of the maids coming home late that way with a pail upon her head heard such a rustling among the bushes that she let it fall. So a very common phenomenon. So Addison is taking, you see, the narrative of commonplace events in society and then trying to explain them, or is trying to sort of bring reason into such irrational behavior. I was taking a walk in this place last night and could not fancy it. The ruins of the abbey are scattered up and down on every side, the harbors of several solitary birds which seldom make their appearance till dusk. The place was formerly a churchyard, and we have this, kind of fascination with the graveyard and the burning places, so that we consider that these are haunted places, and has still several marks in it of graves and burying places. There's such an echo among the old ruins and vaults that if you stamp a little louder, you hear the sound repeated. So he's explaining it in terms of scientific phenomenon and why, the psychology of the people considers these as haunted. At the same time, the walk of elms with the croaking of the ravens looks exceedingly solemn and venerable. These objects naturally raise seriousness and attention. And when night heightens the awfulness of the place and pours out her supernumerary horrors upon everything, I do not wonder that weak minds fill it with specters and apparitions. So remember, he had tried to talk in essay number 10 of reforming the age, as it were, from the evils it had fallen upon. And superstition is one such evil. And Addison is trying to explain why these kinds of superstitions visit the people and how they can be rectified. Mr. Locke, in a chapter in The Association of Ideas, this is, of course, in the Essay of Human Understanding, and Locke suggests that ideas come in clusters. So if you're thinking of, say, bread, you will often think of butter. If you think of butter, you'll think about milk, you'll think about a cow, and so on. So associations of ideas very often are together, and this is a suggestion by Locke. Remarks to show how, by the prejudice of education, one idea often introduces into the mind a whole set that bear no resemblance to one another. Among several kinds, it produces the same instance. The ideas of goblins and sprites have nothing to do with darkness than light, yet let a foolish maid inculcate these often on the mind of a child and raise them there together. So very often, you see, also these superstitions, as Addison says, are often rooted in our everyday fairy tales that the child is often exposed to. For example, in many of you have heard these from your grandmothers and even grand aunts, and very often they have a very deep sensation on the minds of the people, so that the idea of the night, darkness, and fairies or ghosts very often percolate our minds. Possibly he shall never be able to separate them again so long as he lives, but darkness shall afterwards bring with it those frightful ideas, and they shall be so joined that he can no more bear the one than the other. I observed a cow grazing not far from me, which an imagination that was apt to startle might easily have construed into a black horse without a head. And I dare say the proper footman lost its wits upon such a trivial occasion. So it's explaining how superstition takes hold of the credulous, and how the uneducated very often fall prey to such superstitions. My friend Sir Roger has often told me with a great deal of mirth that at his first coming into the estate, he found there 3 parts of his house altogether useless, because they were all supposed to be haunted. That noises had been heard in his long gallery, so that he could not get a servant to enter it after 8 o'clock at night. That the door of one of the chambers was nailed up. That there went a story in the family that a butler had formerly hanged himself in it. So, if you remember the film Bulbulaya, for example, and the kind of mysteries associated with it, and the kind of ghosts that were associated. So Roger's, large mansion probably had numerous, rooms that were haunted. And that his mother, who had lived a great age, had shut up half the rooms in the house in which her son, daughter had died. So very often we associate rooms of death with ghosts, right? The knight, seeing his habitation reduced to so small a compass, upon the death of his mother, ordered all the apartments to be flung open and exorcised. Exorcised is, poured holy water or sort of shown the cross so that the ghosts would flee. So, purified of ghosts by his chaplain, who lay in every room one after the other, and by that means dissipated the fears which had so long reigned in the family. So Sir Roger has a practical solution to this. He doesn't give a theoretical solution that, there's no ghost, so there's no fear. What he does instead, he uses religion. And he practically asks the chaplain to lie or sleep in every room every day, so that, people can be freed of this fear of the ghosts. I should not have thus been particular upon these ridiculous horrors, did I not find them so much prevail in the parts of the country. So Addison is here, this is the moral caveat. So he's given you a narrative, humorous incident, and then he's providing the moral of the essay. At the same time, I think a person who is thus terrified with the imagination of ghosts, much more reasonable than one who, contrary to all the reports of historians, sacred and profane, think the appearance of spirits fabulous and groundless. I might add that not only historians, to whom we may join the poets, but likewise the philosophers of antiquity have favored this opposition, this opinion. Lucretius himself, though by course of this philosophy, was obliged to maintain that the soul did not exist separate from the body. But he does not dismiss ghosts and apparitions altogether. He says that there is something called the spirit, but they are not so rampantly visible, and that most of the visitations or visualizations of the ghosts are all actually superstition. So I shall dismiss this paper, he says, with a story out of Josephus. Glaphyra, the daughter of King Archelaus, after the death of her first two husbands, and he says she then wanted to marry again, and the ghost came and said, "Thou hast made good old saying that women are not to be trusted. Was I not the husband of thy virginity?" Glaphyra told this dream to several women of her acquaintance and died soon after. And he says, besides that, the example deserves to be taken off, as it contains a most certain proof of the immortality of the soul and of divine providence. If any man thinks these facts incredible, let him enjoy his own opinion to himself, but let him not endeavor to disturb the belief of others, who by instances of this nature are excited to the study of virtue. So Addison is making this point that, he is not an atheist, or he does not believe, he does believe rather, in the existence of the spirit, of the soul, but he does not believe in the appearance of ghosts and superstitions, and in every case, they ought to be very carefully visualized so that, these simple incidents are not magnified into irrational beliefs. So there is a dichotomy and a duality here. Addison believes in religion, he believes in the existence of the spirit, he believes that there is something called the supernatural. But at the same time, he believes that the visitations, sightings commonly seen in the rural countryside are often fruits of superstition. So he believes in the supernatural and the spirit, but is not willing to believe in ghosts and apparitions. Right? He suggests that there is nothing, that ghosts and apparitions and ghost stories are nothing but elements of superstition, whereas the spirit is a matter of religion. So it is with this dichotomy that he sort of brings this essay to a close. Right. Now, take a look, therefore, at another essay which I would like you to sort of see. And this is probably essay number 117 of the Spectator papers. Yeah, that is it. This is, once again, their own imaginations that deceive. This is taken from Virgil. There are some opinions in which a man should stand neuter without engaging his assent, Addison says, to one side or the other. Such a hovering faith as this, which refuses to settle upon any determination, is absolutely necessary in a mind that is careful to avoid errors and prepossessions. It is with this temper of mind that I considered the subject of witchcraft. Right? You see, once again, witchcraft was something that the medieval age had believed in, and women had been burnt to the stake because of this. Now, witchcraft, of course, as a practice, had been outlawed and banned and had died down. But still, in villages especially, there was this idea of the old, diseased, very often mentally challenged woman as a witch. And this was a very rampant belief. So Addison is here turning his focus on these rural superstitious beliefs. When I hear the relations that are made from all the parts of the world, but from every nation of Europe, I cannot forbear that there is such an intercourse and commerce with evil spirits, that we express by the name of witchcraft. But when I consider the ignorant and credulous parts of the world, and that persons among us who are supposed to engage in such an infernal commerce are people of a weak understanding and crazed imagination, right? And at the same time reflect upon the many impostures and delusions of this nature that have been detected in all the ages, I endeavor to suspend my belief till I hear more certain accounts than any of which have come to my knowledge. So this is a very important point that he's making. I'm not saying that there's nothing called witches or the supernatural, but most of the cases that I hear in the countries are crazed imagination, are products of our false imagination, and I will only hold them true when I have actually verified them. So at the end, Addison is suggesting that the supernatural can only be believed in subject to personal verification. So I am engaged in the speculation by some occurrences that I met with yesterday. And you see, this is, so he begins, if you look at the structure of these essays, you'll find that Addison raises a problem at the beginning of the essay. He says, I'm going to speak about this, manners or superstitions. And then he says, gives us a small account, a narrative account in the Coverley papers. And this has, him with Sir Roger. As I was walking with my friend Sir Roger, an old woman applied herself to me for my charity. And so she was begging. And you see, look at the description of the woman, wrinkled hag, dry sticks, mumbling to herself, and on her crooked shoulders she wrapped the tattered remnants of her old stripped hanging. There's nothing about peace about her. So there was, her lower weeds were all over coarsely patched and seemed to speak variety of wretchedness. So it's a description of poverty and wretchedness for Addison. As I was musing on this description, the knight told me that this very old woman had the reputation of a witch all over the country, and her lips were always observed to be in motion. So she was always, speaking to herself, mumbling to herself, and that there was not a switch about her house which her neighbors did not believe had carried her several hundreds of miles. If she chanced to stumble, they always found sticks or straws that lay in the figure of a cross before her. If she made any mistake at church and cried Amen in a wrong place, they never failed to conclude that she was saying her back prayers backwards. So once again, credulous and false imagination. She goes by the name of Moll White and has made, Moll is a woman as such, has made the country ring with several imaginary exploits which are palmed upon her. Moll White is, if a horse sweats in the stable, Moll White has been upon her back. If a hare makes an unexpected escape from the hounds, the huntsman cries Moll White. Nay, says Sir Roger, I have known the master of the pack upon such an occasion send one of his servants to see if Moll White has been out that morning. So you see, on the roads in your villages or towns, you very often see these people, the old women who are in rags, or men even who are mumbling to themselves. Most of the times they're schizophrenic or they're suffering from a mental disease, which can be very easily cured. But the people foist upon them the notion of a kind of a witchcraft. So the Spectator now goes to verify. I begged my friend Sir Roger to go with me into her hovel. And upon our first entering, Sir Roger winked to me. I found an old broom staff. So very often, the very broom that we keep in our houses to clean it are seen as objects of witchcraft. At the same time, there was a tabby cat, which the knight told me as bad a report as Moll White herself. So the cat of Moll White is also seen as something of a supernatural creature. I was secretly concerned to see human nature in so much wretchedness and disgrace. but at the same time could not forbear smiling to hear Sir Roger advising her as a justice of peace to avoid all communication with the devil and never to hurt any of her neighbors' cattle. So very obviously it was very ridiculous, but Sir Roger had to do it so that, he kept up the pretense of being part of the public, prosecutor, as it were. But you see, Sir Roger, despite his eccentricities, has a very sound common sense. And he told me that old Moll had been brought before him for making children spit pins, giving maids the nightmare, and the country people would be tossing her into a pond and trying experiments with her every day if it was not for him and the chaplain. I've since found upon inquiry that Sir Roger was several times staggered with the reports that had been brought him concerning this old woman, and would frequently have bound her over to the county sessions, had not his chaplain with much ado persuaded him to the contrary. So Sir Roger understands with his common sense that the country people will not be got rid of their superstitions, but he has prevented Moll White from being thrown into the pond or punished just because of this. So I've been the more particular in this account, and this comes the kind of a moral caveat of the essays. This is what the morality of the essay is. Because I hear there is scarce a village in England that has not a Moll White in it. When an old woman begins to dote and grow chargeable to a parish, she's generally turned into a witch and fills the whole country with extravagant fancies, distempers, and terrifying dreams. In the meantime, the poor wretch that is the innocent occasion of so many evils begins to be frightened at herself, and sometimes confesses secret commerce and familiarities that her imagination forms in delirious old age. So very often they are forced into confessions, and their senility becomes a symbol of witchcraft, right? And therefore, this frequently cuts off charity from the greatest objects of compassion and inspires people with a malevolence towards those poor, decrepit parts of our species in whom human nature is defaced by infirmity and dotage. So Addison is suggesting that, these beliefs in witches and witchcraft is unfounded, and that very often in the villages, old and senile women who are mentally challenged become objects of, popular malevolence, and instead of charity, they are very often cast as witches. So in the two essays that we have seen today, in both these essays, you see, this is how the public sphere is conditioned. Addison is suggesting that very often perception within the public sphere is false, erroneous, and it is with these essays, the small doses of morality and narrative that he points out, that he wishes to represent them and well as bring them into correction through the essays and the moral caveats. It is thus, therefore, that Addison is seeking in the essays to bring a kind of a morality into the narration and the narration into the morality. Once again, remember that these essays are directed towards the general public and to condition, as Addison says, 60,000 people into thinking rationally. So Addison realizes, of course, and he does this through Sir Roger, is that you cannot take away superstition entirely. But if you can talk about them, if you can bring them into a discussion in the public sphere, and if you can talk about, contemporary philosophers like Locke, and you can talk about verification of the superstitions, then a lot of these superstitions can be tackled. So it's creating an intelligentsia, as it were. Not an intelligentsia that is wholly upper class, but an intelligentsia within the country and the city that can take a close scrutiny of the popular customs, rationalize them, and prune them of their irrational behavior. At the same time, you see, what Addison has done is he has created small narrative incidents. He knows that if he moralizes only, then people will not listen. So to enhance the popularity of the essays, he's given us a small narrative. And it is through these narratives that the essays, the functionality of the essay's morality can operate. It is therefore thus that he's bringing debates into the public sphere, one. Two, is enlivening morality with wit, morality with incident, and tempering the incident with morality. So the last paragraph of every essay seems to deliver the moral, whilst the first paragraph of every essay seems to raise the issue that he's going to discuss. In the meanwhile, or in between, there is an entire sequence of narrative events that gives us the kind of narrative delight. Now, subsequently, of course, you will sort of try and answer this question as to how these are proto-novels. Now, all these incidents are not a unified, long, entire narrative. They are very small narratives. But if you draw them out essay by essay into this sequence of the Coverley papers, then you have a kind of an idea of Sir Roger de Coverley as such. Now, in our earlier essays, we saw how Sir Roger de Coverley was pompous, how very often he was eccentric, he would behave, as the lord of the manor, and he would stand up in the middle of the prayer, and he was slightly a butt of comic ridicule. But here we see a different Sir Roger. A Sir Roger who is commonsensical, who realizes that the country people expect him to fulfill a role. Therefore, he tells Small White not to curse anybody. He sort of inherits this estate with superstitions. And then, slowly, he induces practical measures. For example, he opens these rooms, and what the people believe in, religion, he tackles the superstition with religion, as well as he tackles the case of Small White by preventing the people from torturing her. Right. So this is the difference of Roger. Sir Roger, who is master of the county, and who with his common sense, tries to address these questions. The Spectator, in these two essays, therefore, has much more admiration for Sir Roger, right? If the first two essays were, slightly ironic portraits of Sir Roger, these two essays have a more, admirable, practical Sir Roger who tackles these issues with a sound common sense. So it is with that then that I would like to sort of stop the projection here. These are the two essays that we discussed. I think I'll discuss two more essays with you. One is the perverse widow, Sir Roger in Love, and the death of Sir Roger, following which I will bring this discussion to a close and then talk about the questions of Sir Roger de Coverley. In the meanwhile, of course, let me just remind you that we have one more section. I'll stop recording here.